In the remote northern reaches of North Korea, where the Tumen River flows cold and unforgiving between two worlds, a young man named Mi-hun stood at the edge of his destiny. At just 21 years old, he had recently completed the brutal training required to become a border guard for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The training had been designed not only to break bodies but to reshape souls. For months, Mi-hun and his fellow recruits endured endless ideological sessions where instructors screamed that anyone attempting to leave the paradise of the Kim dynasty was a traitor, a dog, an enemy of the people who deserved death. They were forced to run through snow and mud with heavy packs, practice shooting at human-shaped targets labeled with the faces of imagined defectors, and recite pledges of absolute loyalty to the supreme leader. Sleep was a luxury, food was meager, and any sign of doubt was punished severely with beatings or isolation. By the time Mi-hun received his uniform and rifle, something inside him had already begun to fracture. He felt morally exhausted, haunted by the knowledge of what his new role would demand. His first months on duty along the border were a nightmare that unfolded in slow motion. Mi-hun was stationed in a small outpost near the river, where patrols went out day and night in freezing temperatures. The orders were clear and merciless: shoot to kill anyone trying to cross into China. On his very first patrol, he witnessed a group of desperate people, a family including a mother carrying a small child, wading into the icy waters under cover of darkness. His comrades opened fire without hesitation. The screams echoed across the water. Mi-hun raised his rifle but could not bring himself to pull the trigger on the woman. Later, when the bodies were recovered, he was reprimanded for his hesitation. "Next time, you shoot or you join them," his superior warned. That night, Mi-hun could not sleep. He saw the faces of the dead in his dreams, ordinary people driven by hunger and fear to risk everything for a chance at something better. As weeks turned into months, the horrors piled up. Mi-hun participated in capturing escapees who had been turned back by Chinese authorities or caught in the act. He saw young men and women beaten during interrogation, forced to confess to crimes they had not committed, their families back home punished under the guilt by association system. One particularly haunting incident involved a teenage boy who had tried to swim across. The boy was dragged from the water, shivering and terrified. During the interrogation, Mi-hun heard him whisper about the lies of the regime, that people in the South lived better, that the propaganda was false. Before the boy could say more, he was taken away. Mi-hun never saw him again. Rumors spread that he had been executed publicly as an example. Another time, Mi-hun was ordered to help transport captured defectors to a nearby detention center. There, he witnessed beatings, starvation tactics, and the casual cruelty of guards who treated human beings like animals. He began to question everything. Why were people so desperate to leave if this was truly the best country in the world? Why did the regime fear information from the outside so much that listening to a foreign radio or watching a smuggled video could destroy entire families? The turning point came on a bitterly cold night in late autumn. Mi-hun was on solo patrol along a remote stretch of the river. The fog was thick, and the only sounds were the rushing water and his own breathing. As he scanned the darkness, he spotted movement, not escapees this time, but something else. Hidden in the reeds, he found a small waterproof package that had washed up or been left behind. Inside was a smuggled South Korean USB drive and a small radio. Curiosity overcame fear. That night, in the relative privacy of his barracks when others slept, Mi-hun listened. What he heard shattered the last remnants of his indoctrination. He heard news of the outside world, music that was joyful and free. Stories of defectors who had made it to freedom and were living normal lives. He heard about the true conditions in North Korea's political prison camps, the starvation that gripped the countryside, and the extravagant luxuries enjoyed by the Kim family while ordinary citizens suffered. For the first time, Mi-hun understood the scale of the deception. The regime he had sworn to protect was built on lies, fear, and the suffering of its own people. He thought of his own family back home, how they too lived in fear and poverty, while believing the propaganda that painted their leader as a benevolent father. The guilt of having enforced that system, even reluctantly, weighed heavily on his young shoulders. Every face felt like a mirror to his own lost humanity. He could no longer be part of it. From that moment, escape became inevitable. Mi-hun knew he could not continue. Every patrol felt like a betrayal of his own humanity. He began to plan meticulously, using his knowledge of patrol schedules, guard rotations, and weak points along the border. He gathered a few supplies, extra food, warm clothes, a small knife, and waited for the right conditions. The night he chose was moonless and foggy, perfect for concealment. During his shift, Mi-hun slipped away from his post under the pretense of checking a distant section. He moved quickly to the riverbank, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it would give him away. The water was freezing, but he waded in, then swam desperately toward the opposite shore. Halfway across, shots rang out from behind. Bullets splashed around him. A burning pain seared his shoulder as one grazed him, but he kept going, driven by pure adrenaline and the vision of freedom. He reached the Chinese side exhausted and bleeding, hiding in bushes until dawn. The journey from there was long and perilous. In China, Mi-hun lived in constant fear of being caught by authorities, who often repatriated North Koreans back to certain punishment or death. He hid in safe houses arranged by underground networks, worked odd jobs for food, and slowly made contact with brokers who helped defectors reach South Korea. The process took months. He crossed into Mongolia at one point, endured interrogation by South Korean intelligence upon arrival, and, eventually, because of the valuable information he carried about border defenses and regime operations, he was offered resettlement in the United States for his safety and to share his knowledge. In America, Mi-hun was debriefed extensively by intelligence officials. He revealed everything he knew: the locations of sensitive military installations near the border, details of how the regime monitored and punished its citizens, weaknesses in the chain of command, and personal observations about the paranoia and internal rivalries within Kim Jong-un's inner circle. He spoke of the human cost, the families torn apart, the children indoctrinated into hate, the ordinary soldiers like him who were forced to become monsters or break. His testimony helped paint a clearer picture of the regime's brutality and vulnerabilities. Mi-hun had traded his uniform for freedom, but the scars of what he had seen and done would stay with him forever. He had betrayed the regime not out of greed or cowardice, but because he could no longer betray his own conscience. In the fortified compounds of Pyongyang's military elite, where loyalty to the Kim dynasty was measured in blood and silence, there lived an officer named Kang Min-woo. For over 2 decades, he had served the regime with unwavering dedication. As a rising star in the Ministry of State Security, Kang had participated in countless operations to root out enemies of the state. He had interrogated suspects, overseen raids on homes suspected of harboring foreign media, and signed off on transfers to political prison camps for those deemed threats, no matter how minor the offense. He had witnessed and, at times, ordered acts that haunted him in quiet moments: the forced separation of families, the public humiliation of accused traitors, the beatings that left prisoners broken, and the casual destruction of lives for the sake of maintaining control. Kang told himself it was necessary for the survival of the nation, for the protection of the supreme leader's vision. He rose through the ranks, received privileges, better housing, extra rations, respect from subordinates, and built a life for his wife and 2 children in the capital. His daughter, Ji-yeon, was 16, bright and curious, with a secret passion for music from the South that she hid carefully from everyone, including her father. The blow came without warning on an ordinary evening. State security agents stormed the family apartment in the middle of the night. They had discovered that Ji-yeon had been listening to South Korean music on a smuggled radio and USB drives containing K-pop songs and dramas. In the eyes of the regime, this was not a harmless teenage interest. It was an act of treason, exposure to reactionary culture that could poison the mind against the Kim family. Ji-yeon was dragged away screaming, her mother pleading on her knees. Kang, as an officer, was forced to stand by initially, his authority meaning nothing in the face of the SSD's power. The agents declared the entire family tainted. Under North Korea's Songbun system and the practice of collective punishment, the sins of one member stained everyone. Ji-yeon was sent directly to a political prison camp, one of the infamous Kwanli-so facilities where political prisoners and their families disappeared into forced labor, starvation, torture, and death. No trial, no appeal, no contact with the outside world. Kang knew from his own years of service that once someone entered those camps, especially a young girl accused of ideological impurity, the chances of survival were slim. The camps operated on the principle that enemies of the regime and their bloodlines must be eradicated or broken completely. 3 generations of punishment was the unspoken law for serious political crimes. Kang understood immediately what this meant for him and the rest of his family. His position was compromised beyond repair. The regime did not forgive or forget. Colleagues who had once respected him would now view him with suspicion. Investigations into his loyalty would follow. His wife and young son would likely face the same fate as Ji-yun, or worse. He had seen it happen to others, officers who fell out of favor, families erased overnight. The guilt he had suppressed for years surged forward. All the terrible things he had done in the name of loyalty now felt like a mountain of debt he could never repay. But one thing remained clear: he would not let the regime take what was left of his family. Without telling anyone, without a long plan, Kang made the decision that night. He gathered his wife and son, packed a few essential items and documents that might help them survive, and they fled under the cover of darkness. Using his intimate knowledge of checkpoints, patrol routes, and internal security procedures, he navigated them out of Pyongyang and toward the northern border. The journey was tense and terrifying. They avoided major roads, traveled by night, and relied on bribes and old contacts who still owed him favors from his years in service. When they reached the river, Kang used his training to find a relatively safe crossing point, helping his family across while watching for patrols. Once in China, the danger did not end. Chinese authorities actively hunted North Korean defectors for repatriation, which often meant torture, imprisonment, or execution back home. The family hid in a network of safe houses, moving frequently, living in constant fear. Brokers demanded large sums for passage to South Korea or further. Kang sold what little they had and worked in secret to earn more. After months of hardship and narrow escapes, they finally reached South Korea, where they underwent intensive debriefing. Because of Kang's high-ranking background and detailed knowledge of the regime's internal security apparatus, he and his family were eventually resettled in the United States for protection. In America, they began the slow process of building new lives, learning English, finding work, trying to heal from the trauma. But the wound of Ji-yun's disappearance never closed. Kang knew the reality of the camps from personal experience. Prisoners there endured backbreaking labor in mines or fields with almost no food, subjected to random executions, medical experiments in some cases, and psychological torment designed to break any spirit of resistance. Disease, starvation, and abuse claimed countless lives. Political prisoners like his daughter were rarely, if ever, released. The regime preferred that they simply vanish, their existence erased to deter others. Kang lived with the agonizing uncertainty. Was Ji-yun still alive, suffering in silence? Had she died alone, thinking her father had abandoned her? Or worse, that he had approved her punishment? He shared what he knew with authorities, details of how the SSD operated, how families were monitored, how information was controlled, the locations and conditions of certain facilities, but nothing could bring his daughter back. His betrayal of the regime had saved his wife and son, but it had come at the cost of the child he could not protect. The officer who had once enforced the system's cruelty had been destroyed by it, in the most personal way possible. These two men, a young border guard and a seasoned officer, came from different worlds within the same oppressive system. Both were forced to confront the human cost of loyalty to a regime that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. Their decisions to betray the Kim dynasty and flee to the United States were acts of ultimate courage, born from unbearable pain and moral awakening. In revealing the secrets they carried, they struck a blow against the darkness that had shaped their lives. Their stories remind us that even in the most controlled societies, the human spirit can rebel when confronted with the truth about suffering and injustice. If these accounts have moved you, please like this video right now, subscribe for more powerful stories of those who risked everything to break free, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with others. Your support helps these voices reach further. May God protect you and keep you safe. Freedom is never free, and the courage of those who risk everything to expose tyranny lights the way for us all. Remember their sacrifice and the price they paid for truth.